We are continuing to prepare for the Passover, and we're preparing in a couple of ways. One, we're studying the Word to understand the significance of Passover to the Father. Whatever it is He wants to reveal to us this year, each year He's revealing more and more to me. And each year He's building me throughout the year so that I can receive more and more. So there's understanding the Passover, and there's also understanding how to enter into the Passover and cleanse myself and make myself ready to enter the Passover. That requires examination. It requires sitting with God and asking Him, what do you want to do in me? What is needed for me to enter into the Passover with you? And remember that this is one of the 3 pilgrimage festivals. So that means that there is an expectation that we are going to cleanse ourselves and do certain things in order to be made ready to enter into this season, to make that pilgrimage to the temple, so to speak, in order to be in the presence of God. You have the Spirit of God in you. You are a temple, but there's some sort of significance that He wants to reveal to us. I'm going to start in Joshua 5:11 because there's something here that is revealed regarding timeline. And it's not so much important with regard to Passover necessarily or how we're observing Passover, but it will become important in terms of understanding at what point do we observe the Festival of Weeks, because you're supposed to count off a certain number of weeks. So here in Joshua 5:11, it says the day after the Passover, that very day, they ate some of the produce of the land, unleavened bread and roasted grain. Well, I know in Leviticus 23 that it says you are not to eat any of the roasted grain until you've brought the sheaf of the wave offering before the Lord. So we're going to go to Leviticus verse 9. The Lord said to Moses, and this is the offering of the first fruits. So this is happening, it doesn't specify in Leviticus 23 necessarily when this is happening. It says, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you, and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. Well, when is that? I don't know when they entered the land, but between these 2 scriptures, you're going to figure it out right now. Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I'm going to give you and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord, so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day you wave the sheaf, you must sacrifice a burnt offering to the Lord, a lamb, a year old without defect, together with its grain offering of 2/10 of an ephah of the finest flour mixed with olive oil, a food offering presented to the Lord, a pleasing aroma, and its drink offering of 1/4 of a hin of wine. You must not eat any of the bread or roasted new grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. So in Joshua, we know that they wouldn't have been eating the roasted grain at all until they brought that sheaf of the wave offering to God. And we're told in Joshua 5:11 that the day after the Passover is when they were eating it. Remember that the Passover is 7 days. Now, if you go back to Leviticus 23, let's just test this. So the Passover begins when? On the 14th of Aviv or Nisan. Okay, well, this year that's going to begin on Wednesday evening, which is the 5th, because God's days begin on the eve. So from the 5th until the 13th, that will be 7 days. Sounds like 8 days, but remember, you got to account for that evening. It's not the whole day of the 5th of April. In Joshua, the Passover would have begun because you see that it's the very next day that they're doing this. And so the very next day would have been Sunday on the Gregorian calendar. If it was the very next day, that means that the Passover ended on Sabbath. And so that year, the Passover landed on Friday, which would have been Thursday evening to Friday, right? Do you see what the Antichrist did here? He confused things. If you're feeling confused, that was his intention. It would be easier for you to track this if you're looking at some sort of calendar so you can kind of say, oh, okay, I kind of see that. But you see how he confused things? So this year, Passover is beginning on Wednesday night. It ends just before evening on the following Thursday night. So not on the 6th, on the 13th, a week later. And so at that point, you would have waited for Sabbath on the 15th. And then the day after the Sabbath on Sunday, on the 16th, would be when you start counting down until Pentecost. So that would be in Leviticus 23, the offering of the first fruits. The thing you need to understand about this is that there's continuity between Passover, the offering of first fruits, and then the Festival of Weeks. Jesus is an offering of first fruits. And look, it's not like it just stops right there. There's continuity between him being the first fruits and then the witnesses and the apostles being the first fruits that are represented in the Festival of Weeks. How is there continuity? Well, listen to the instructions. The day after Sabbath, following Passover, is when you are to offer the first fruits. You're not allowed to eat any roasted grain until then. And then verse 15 of Leviticus 23 says, from the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, count off 7 full weeks. So he's establishing continuity between these different holy days. That's important. His son coming as the first fruits, blameless and sinless. The apostles and witnesses as first fruits, they are blameless but not sinless. And the only reason they're blameless is because of their faith and servitude to God, and because his son has covered them. So now from that Sabbath where you're offering the first fruits, presenting the first fruits to be accepted by God, do you understand here? You're waving before God, waving the sheaf of the wave offering to be accepted by God. You have to be accepted by God. You can't just contrive your own ministry and then go decide that you're doing something for him and then expect that your offering is going to be accepted. You have to be accepted. From the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, count off 7 full weeks. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath. Then present an offering of new grain to the Lord. From wherever you live, bring 2 loaves made of 2/10 of an ephah of the finest flour baked with yeast as a wave offering of first fruits to the Lord. Why 2 loaves? God's always symbolizing something here. Why 2 loaves? Because they are representing the apostles and the witnesses. 2. When we go to Leviticus 24, you're going to see that the table of bread that's set out, that's also separated in 2, and the 12 tribes of Israel are represented in that bread as well. He's always symbolizing something here, and he's always using that language in order for us to understand symbolism. So stop using some weird counterfeit heavenly language that counterfeit Christianity is calling tongues and claiming you're being edified by garbage. It's garbage. Stop trying to convince yourself that you're being edified by garbage. If you can't interpret what God is saying through you, you're not being edified. It's like ridiculous. What do you think edified is? You should be learning something. He should be speaking to you. And eventually, you need to be speaking to others. Otherwise, what good is that gift? He doesn't give you gifts to not use them for his name, for his purpose. His language is in the Bible. Use his words. Use his language correctly, and you're going to understand. If you start using man's language, you won't recognize that he says first fruits regarding the Festival of Weeks, regarding the offering of first fruits, regarding the 144,000 witnesses, regarding the apostles. Do you see where I'm going with this? You're not going to recognize that. You're not going to recognize when he talks about them being redeemed, being blameless. You are not going to get it because you need to understand the language he has used instead of being focused on some woo-woo heavenly language. That is not a thing. Tongues are languages, period. If you don't speak other languages, it's going to be difficult for you to be able to carry the message to the ends of the earth. That is why languages were given. That is why Paul spoke in tongues more than anybody else, because he was delivering a message to the Gentiles. And in order to do that, he had to speak their language. So here, I just wanted to establish that continuity between Passover, the offering of first fruits, the Festival of Weeks, and this is what is referred to as the early harvest. It is the early harvest because it's at the beginning of the year. This is the first harvest of the year beginning in Aviv or Nisan. And that harvest would be wheat, which is the reason God talks so much about wheat, grain, and bread. The next harvest occurs in summer, which people refer to as the church age harvest. I don't know what that is. I don't see that in the Bible. I don't know why we're using that language. The late harvest is going to be the harvest that occurs later on in the year during autumn. And I can't really get a clear answer online of what's being harvested in Israel at a given time. Sometimes they say that grapes are being harvested during the summer, and sometimes they say they're being harvested at the end. We're not going to try to figure out when Jesus is coming back. No one knows the day or the hour. However, it is possible that the wise understand the year. And how would we understand this? When the witnesses are activated, when the witnesses are killed. If he has revealed these certain things, then it's possible that we know the general time. So if it is true that he has activated his witnesses during Pentecost 2022, June 4th, 2022, 2,595 days later is going to bring us to July. Let's not try to figure out the day, okay? Because he says in those days. That brings us to July, which is summer. And he has continually spoken to us about harvests. So if grapes are being harvested during that time, July, August, September, then that would definitely make sense with or go along with what he has talked about in Revelation regarding harvesting those grapes and throwing them into the winepress of his wrath. So that's something to think about. Where do I get that number? 1,260 days plus 1,335 days. Somewhere in those days, remember, we're not saying the day or hour, but if the wise understand what's going on, then they could also understand based on the number of days that God has given us, and he wouldn't have given us a number of days if he didn't want us to understand the times or the year. So be careful. Don't start making stuff up. Just take the information that God has given you. The late harvest will include the multitude in white robes. Again, Feast of Trumpets, Day of Atonement, and then we have the Festival of Trumpets. Remember that the Festival of Trumpets is the third of the pilgrimage festivals for the year. So we've got Jesus represented in the Passover, witnesses and apostles represented in the Festival of Weeks, multitude in white robes represented in the Festival of Tabernacles. Do you see that? The significance? The early and late harvest also being described with the woman who is in labor in Revelation 12, Zion who's in labor, giving birth to her children. And Revelation 12 is speaking about those children in that same order. Christ first, apostle or witnesses next, multitude in white robes last. I'm going to leave it right there so that you can kind of take this piecemeal. You can chew on it. You can pray about it and be sure to discern it by the Holy Spirit. Thank you for listening. God bless you, and I'll see you in the next video.